All right. So, everyone, I want to introduce you to Dr. Christine Hartford. Dr. Hartford did our very first health workshop series for us just a couple of months ago, I think about 2 months ago. And so, this is another topic that the parents really, really wanted more information on. So, she came together with this presentation, and we're so happy to have her. Now, I'll pass it on to you, Dr. Hartford.
All right, well, thank you so much for having me tonight. I am very excited to be here. I think this is a great topic for us to be discussing tonight. It's a really important topic. It's also a very broad topic. And we could talk for hours probably about nutrition. So what I've decided to do is really focus my talk tonight on the infant and toddler. But I think you'll find that a lot of what I'm going to discuss is applicable to older children and really even the whole family. And then at the end, I will give you some resources that hopefully you'll find helpful and can turn to for additional information. Um, First, I think it's important to really think about why this is such an important topic. One thing that I don't think I always appreciate is the fact that how and what we feed our children during their early years really does establish their health, their tastes, their eating practices, and dietary patterns that really affect them for the rest of their life and therefore affect their health for the rest of their life. So it's really important to get started on a good foot early and establishing those healthy eating patterns really early in life. The other reason why nutrition during this age group is so important is because it really influences the child's neurodevelopment. In the pediatric literature, we talk about nutrition in the first 1,000 days, and that's taking into consideration the prenatal period and then the first 2 years of life, because it's during this time that a child's brain is really going through a tremendous amount of development. And so what that child eats and making sure that that child gets enough of the important nutrients really can have a profound impact. So this definitely is an important topic for us to be discussing tonight. This is just a little overview of what I'm going to touch upon. I'm going to talk a little bit about feeding our newborns, how we go about adding solids to their diet and transitioning to cow's milk. We'll talk a little bit about a balanced and healthy diet for our toddlers. We'll spend some time talking about beverages, so not just what our children eat, but what they drink, because I think that's really important. And then we'll turn to a few more specific topics like weaning from a bottle, picky eaters, changes in appetite. And then at the end, I will discuss a little bit about food labels and how to read them and how they can be helpful to us. So first, for our infants in the first 4 to 6 months of life, we know that this is when we give our infants breast milk or formula, and that is all that they need. An infant can go up to 6 months getting all the nutrients that they need, with few exceptions, from either breast milk or formula. And I think that choice of breast milk or formula, again, that's another topic that we could probably talk about for a whole hour. Of course, as a pediatrician, I certainly advocate breastfeeding. There is benefits for both the baby and the mom for breastfeeding, but I also fully realize that this is a choice that every mother and family has to make for themselves, and they have to do what's best for themselves. But just to go over the benefits of breastfeeding just a little bit, there are benefits for both baby and mom. Of course, breast milk is sort of the gold standard in terms of the nutrients we want to feed our infant. Formula actually tries to mimic breast milk as much as it possibly can. There are some really well-defined immune benefits to the baby from feeding breast milk, because the mom really transmits immune infection fighting antibodies in the breast milk. So studies have shown that breastfed infants do have decreased rates of infections like ear infections, pneumonias, and gastroenteritis. And then it also can impact future health for both baby and mom. Infants who are breastfed have decreased rates of asthma, allergy, eczema, and even obesity. And moms who breastfeed, it has been shown that they have decreased rates of ovarian and breast cancer, and possibly even things like hypertension and cardiovascular disease. But I fully recognize there's definitely challenges. For some mother-infant pairs, getting started with breastfeeding can be really challenging. And for some moms, it's a source of a lot of anxiety and struggle. Also, if mom is going back to work, that definitely can be challenging without question. And then it also can make it more difficult for getting other caregivers like dad or other caregivers who want to feed the baby involved. Formula feeding, on the other hand, I think can also be overwhelming. I breastfed both my children, and I don't come with that practical experience that we all gain from doing something ourselves, whether it's breastfeeding or formula feeding. I think by going through the process yourself, and you learn things and you gain experience. So trying to educate myself about formulas, I'll often wonder how are moms not overwhelmed, because there are just, if you walk down the aisle of Target or any grocery store, there are just so many different kinds of formulas. Um, what I want to say, and I should qualify, most of what I'm talking about here, especially with this age group, I'm talking about for our healthy full-term infants. This does not apply to preterm infants. But for your healthy full-term baby, just start with a standard infant formula.
Yeah, you're gonna get them
A
up.
lot of the different formulas that are out there, a lot of it is marketing. Not now, that's not to say that some formulas, there might not be instances where different children could benefit. Um, but I would encourage you, before making a lot of formula changes, to discuss it with your pediatrician. Not that switching to some of the other formulas would be harmful for your baby, but really just think about whether it's really necessary, because a lot of this more different or special formulas also can be more expensive. And so just having that discussion about what's going on with your baby, is it really necessary to change formulas, can be worthwhile. And I can say from my perspective as a pediatrician, if there's a child and mom is worried that they're having some issues with the formula, sometimes they make several changes in a row between visits with me, and it can make it really challenging to really sort out and figure out what's going on. So just keep that in mind. One thing I would like to say about bottle feeding, and that this goes whether it's breast milk or formula in the bottle, a couple things to keep in mind. We do not need to add cereal to our baby's bottles. That just adds extra calories. And as I said, I think I said earlier, a baby will get all the nutrients that they need, with few exceptions, from the breast milk or the formula itself. So they do not need that cereal added to it. And I think some parents do this because they think it helps with their baby's sleeping, which studies haven't really supported that. And there are other strategies we can use to help a baby sleep. So I would encourage you to discuss that with your pediatrician as well. And then this is a little different from nutrition, but I just wanted to throw it in there to make sure and reinforce the fact that we should never be putting our babies to bed with a bottle. That milk can sit in their mouth, coat their teeth, and it really increases the dental caries and leads to lots of cavities. So just keep that in mind. There are some nutrients that are really important for our infants. Vitamin D is very important for our bones. It helps with calcium and phosphorus absorption. And this we need to supplement. So this is the one exception in terms of what breast milk does not have enough of. It's vitamin D. So we supplement this in our breastfed infants soon after birth with just an oral liquid vitamin. It's already added to infant formula, so you don't need to do that if your baby is formula fed. But vitamin D is very important. Iron is the other thing that's really important. So iron is important for growth, immune function. It helps to prevent certain kinds of anemia. And this again is already added to our infant formulas. For our breastfed babies, they need to start getting more iron around 4 to 6 months of age sometimes, and that's for a full-term infant. Preterm infants need it even earlier because they don't have the benefit of their full gestation, and that's towards the end of gestation where babies really can build up their iron stores. So preemies sort of start at a deficit to begin with, and most premature infants will be sent home from the hospital with an iron supplementation, depending on how premature they were. But for our breastfed babies, they really need to start getting more iron definitely by 6 months of age. And this can be from the diet, from the solid foods that we start to add, which we'll talk about soon. But for some infants, depending on how they're doing and some other factors, your pediatrician may recommend that your baby starts iron even earlier. And then zinc is the other nutrient that is really important, again, for immune function, for growth, and for neurodevelopment. And that is commonly found in things like the meats and the cereals that we give our babies, so they can start getting that from the diet when we start adding solid foods. So when we talking about introducing solids, the first question is when. And we need to wait till our babies are developmentally ready. So what do we mean by that? They need to have good head control. They need to be able to really be able to support their head without any problems. They need to be able to sit well. Now that can be with support or on their own, but as long as they have good trunk control, even with support, that's fine. And they need to be able to have the appropriate movements with their tongue so that they can move the food to the back of their mouth and swallow instead of just spitting it out on their chin. So this, we won't see this happen in our babies before 4 months of age. So 4 months is the earliest time period. And we really need these solid foods to be started by 6 months of age. That by that point, that is when our baby's needs and growth are going to outstrip what our breast milk and formula alone can give them. So it's really sometime between that 4 to 6 months age group, age time frame. And this is something that you should be discussing with your pediatrician, but that just gives you a general guide. What we should be feeding them is then the next question. And really, we want our infants to be getting a full range of nutrient dense foods from all food groups starting fairly early. We'll talk about kind of choices for what to start with, but once you get started, it's really a good idea to really start introducing lots of variety into your baby's diet right from the beginning. And one thing that's changed in recent years is around the introduction of potentially allergenic foods like peanuts, eggs, milk products, some nuts, things like that. We used to think that, oh, if we delay the introduction, that will really help prevent allergies. And what several studies over the recent years have shown is that actually is not the case. It's by introducing these foods early on that really can help prevent food allergies. So I just want to make sure everyone is aware of that. This is definitely something you can talk to your pediatrician about more. But we don't need to be afraid to start to introduce some of these other foods into our babies' diets from the very beginning once they start their solids. I thought this would be a good time to just review the food groups. So we're going to be talking about that a lot. So we're going to take a little segue here. So this is this website, myplate.gov, is really a great website. It has a lot of useful information on it. But this illustrates the food groups here. So of course we have our fruits and vegetables, which I think is pretty obvious to all of us, but we really want to be focusing on certain nutrients that we can get from our fruits and vegetables, such as potassium, vitamin A, and vitamin C. So we're talking about things like bananas, oranges, spinach, broccoli, carrots, sweet potatoes, strawberries, just the wide variety. I think if we focus on introducing a variety of foods into our children's diets from the very beginning, that's a great approach to take. And it can be really helpful, I think, in terms of having your child be willing to accept and try new things. In terms of our fruits and vegetables, they can also, some of them, especially those in the beans and peas and lentils group, are also a really good source of protein and fiber. Our grains for the little ones, this is where the cereals come in. So we encourage all different kinds of cereals: oat, barley, multigrain, rice. And once you're sort of past the cereal stage and you're looking at grains, you want to be giving whole grains rather than processed and refined grains, because in whole grains, the nutrients tend to be more dense. Proteins, those are our meats, our eggs, our nuts. In addition to being a good source of protein, we get lots of other good things from them as well, like iron, zinc, and the long chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are really important in our young children for their brain development. And then finally, our dairy. And as we'll talk about in a minute, we don't want to be introducing milk before 12 months of age, but you can give things like yogurt and cheese. And these are a good source of calcium and vitamin D, which we know our children really need. So our goals when we're introducing solid foods to our young infants is first and foremost to meet the nutrient requirements. The little babies and infants and toddlers, they're growing so fast that they really do have a pretty high nutrient requirement, especially with respect to how many calories they need, right? They need many fewer calories than we do, but they need a lot of nutrients. So it's really important to make sure every bite that they put in their little bodies is nutritious and what we say nutrient dense as possible. So we want to meet their nutrient requirements. We want to meet their calorie requirements. And just as important is to limit the things that are not good for them, the things that they really don't need a whole lot of, which is sugars and salt. And then, as I mentioned before, we are establishing in these little 6 to 12-month babies healthy eating habits. So paying attention to that and offering them varieties of flavors and textures can really be setting the stage for really healthy diet patterns for years to come. Where to start with our solids? So I think I mentioned earlier that at 6 months of age, kids really are needing more iron. And so starting with an iron-rich foods is a good place to start. And these can be the iron-fortified cereals or our meats, but then steadily add new foods, fruits, vegetables, meats, grains, just the whole variety right from the very beginning can be really helpful. Now, remember to be persistent. Children may not accept all new foods right from the beginning, but it can take several tries. It can take up to 10 to 15 tries with a new food to get a child to accept it. So don't give up. You can always go back to something in a few days and try it again. And one little bit of parenting advice that I think is a really good idea is to try the new foods when you know your child is really hungry, because they are more likely to accept them. And of course, when we're adding new foods, we do want to be mindful of looking for allergies. So signs of allergy with a new food would be, of course, rash and also vomiting and diarrhea. So if you notice that, I would hold off on that food and then, discuss that with your pediatrician. Just as important as what we are introducing is what we should be limiting. So things to limit at this stage are especially added sugars. So added sugars are just what it says. It's the sugar that's added to foods as they're processed and packaged. And these tend to be, and it's also things like just plain sugar, syrups, honey, things like that. These added sugars really have no nutritious value. They just add calories. So as I mentioned before, for our little ones, they need nutrients. We need to make every bite that they take as nutritious as possible. So really focusing on trying to limit the added sugars, which really just add calories without nutritional value, is important. We want to limit sodium, of course. And then just a few sort of particular things for our little ones. Honey should not be given to children under the age of 1. There's a specific 1 year, I should say. There's a specific bacteria in honey that can cause something called botulism. That's rare, but it's still possible. So we recommend avoiding it. And then unpasteurized foods and beverages can also have bacteria in them that can be harmful to the little ones. One thing I had said earlier is we're setting the stage for healthy diet habits and eating habits. And when we introduce things like a lot of sugar or sodium this early on, the child can get really a sort of taste for them or get used to them and want them in their diet. And so we don't want to establish those likes at all. It would be best, and as we all know, it's harder to take things away than to introduce them. So really thinking about that and trying to limit exposure to those things can be helpful to your child. So transitioning to milk, this should occur at 12 months of age and not before. And this is for a couple of reasons. Whole cow's milk is a good thing for your child to drink once they're over 1 year of age, but earlier on, it does not have everything they need. It doesn't have the adequate nutrients to support young infants who are growing so rapidly. It also has some proteins and other nutrients in them that can be harder for the little ones to digest. But once the child hits that 12-month age mark, it's fine to transition to cow's milk. If you are breastfeeding your infant and you can choose to continue breast milk, that's fine. But if you are formula feeding your infant, you do not, the baby doesn't need the formula anymore, you can transition to milk. And we recommend starting with plain whole cow's milk for most children. Whole milk is fine up until 2 years of age. If you're concerned about that, or if your pediatrician is concerned, and he or she may recommend more of a 2% milk for your child, but for the most part, whole milk is fine. We recommend that you avoid flavored milks, like chocolate milk, strawberry milk. That is just example of added sugar. So it adds flavor, it adds sweetness, but it adds calories, but it does not add nutrition. And as we mentioned, we want we want everything going into our child's mouths for the most part to be as nutritious as possible. Plant-based alternatives such as soy milk is fine. It has enough nutrients for young children, but others such as oat, rice, coconut, or almond milk do not. So it's not that having a little bit would harm your child, but exclusively drinking those types of milks will not give the child the nutrients that they need. As far as weaning from the bottle, so I don't have like a magic answer for this. I think it should be phased out somewhere between 12 to 24 months of age. I don't think any child over the age of 2 needs to be drinking from a bottle. I start with a sippy cup and use that as a transition. Somewhere around 12 to 14 months, most children can drink from a sippy cup. Some children can get the hang of it earlier, somewhere around 9 to 10 months. It really just varies based on the child. One good strategy is to use the sippy cup to introduce water into the diet. We'll talk about that in a second. And then once your child gets the hang of it and can drink from the sippy cup well, then just transition all of their beverages into that sippy cup. Especially when your child gets past the 1-year mark and more of what they're eating is they're not relying on the breast milk or the formula for their nutrition. They're going to get more and more of that from solid foods. They should be drinking when they're thirsty. And don't let your child get into the habit of using their sippy cup or bottle, if they're still on a bottle, as sort of a security blanket and walking around with it and drinking all day. And this is for a few reasons. They tend to overdrink and undereat. And I see this a lot, especially in our between years 1 and 2. I would say this is most common, but it can happen later. But children who walk around with their bottle or their cup and they just kind of tend to sip all day long, that keeps them full. And then they don't want to eat the more nutritious, dense, solid foods that they really need. The other reason that this can be harmful is when it's just a continuous coating on the teeth of milk or juice. It can contribute to tooth decay and cavities. And then again, just reinforcing what I said earlier, no bottle and here sippy cup in the bed. So let's transition and start talking a little bit about our toddlers. And as I said earlier, we're transitioning less from relying on our formula and breast milk and more onto our solid foods. And so we really want those nutrient dense foods, those foods that are high in all the good things that our children need, to be a large portion of their diet. We want children to be getting a variety of foods from all the different food groups. Once they get into this toddler age, we can allow some calories from things like oils, but there's still really no room in the diet for added sugars. If we want our children to sort of stay within a healthy calorie amount and get all the nutrients that they need every bite to count. They need every bite to be as nutritious as possible. And then dairy, as I mentioned with the milk, usually can be high fat, whole milk until about 2 years of age. I've mentioned this concept of nutrient dense foods several times, so I just wanted to give some practical examples I guess we have pretty much every food group represented here. So when we look at our cereals, you could have your cereal with added sugar. So this looks like something more like a Fruit Loop. A more nutrient dense option would be a cereal with minimal added sugars, which that looks more like a Cheerio to me. So they're still getting the grains from the cereal, but they're not getting the added sugar. This vegetable example here for a snack, you have your high sodium snack on the left, which looks like a fried veggie straw or something like that. So you're getting a lot of extra sodium versus just your raw vegetables. A fruit example, you have your Fig Newtons. So yes, that's technically a fruit, but it's a processed and packaged product that has a lot of added sugars compared to a whole fruit, a canned fruit, which would be more nutrient dense. So the calories that the child's ingesting are just proportionally more nutrient dense. They have more nutrients, less added sugars, less empty calories. So you're making that bite count more towards the goal of giving them the most nutrient dense options that you can. I don't think we need to go through all the examples, but I just thought that might be helpful. And then again, this is just a reminder, in our toddlers, we're really trying to give them a good variety of foods every day for the most part, but we'll talk about that later, from all the different food groups. And then we're trying to limit things like added sugars, salts, and added fats. So let's talk for a second about what should our children be drinking. And we've talked about formula, we've talked about milk, but what about water and juice? Water is great for our kids. It's one of the best things they can drink, but they don't need it really until a year of age. They definitely don't need any milk, or excuse me, any water in the first 6 months. So if your child is drinking the formula or the breast milk that they need, that's giving them the hydration that they need. After 6 months, you can start to introduce milk or water, sorry. And as I mentioned, one thing that I like to do is just use the sippy cup for that. Wait till they get a little old enough to try the sippy cup, and then use that as a way to introduce water and the cup itself. But between 6 to 12 months, you can start to slowly introduce water. 4 to 8 ounces of plain fluoridated water is okay. But again, it's not necessary. If your child is drinking the breast milk and the formula that they need, that should be giving them enough as far as hydration as well. And then after they get to that 1 year of age, you slowly can increase the amount of water that they're drinking. And water is really good for our children to drink. The other thing to think about is juice. So I think we all give our children juice, and I think of it as a really healthy food. But there are healthier options in a lot of instances. We do not recommend juice before 12 months of age. And although it's okay to give small amounts between 12 to 24 months of age, it's really not necessary. What is better for your child is to have whole fruits. So we sort of say, eat your fruit rather than drink it, because whole fruits have things like fiber in them and other nutrients that are really good for us, whereas the juices do not have those. But in that 12 to 24 month age group, up to 4 ounces of juice is okay. It's important to make sure that it's 100% juice and does not have the added sugars added to it, like we talked about earlier. And the thing about fruit juice is it's sweet. It tastes good, but it does taste very sweet. And when you compare water and juice, of course, juice is going to be more appealing to your child. And so, as we said before, once you introduce something, it's a little bit harder to take it away. So I would focus more on water and milk at the earlier ages and less from the juice. Other beverages, things to avoid. Toddler formula. So I put that in quotes because it's not really like a thing as far as like what our toddlers need. I think again falls into this marketing. I was reading something about these toddler formulas not that long ago, and this person who wrote this article really compared the toddler formulas to the infant formulas, and some of them from some of the companies are almost exactly the same as the infant formulas. They're just repackaging them, rebranding them, and it's just another thing to offer parents to make us think that we need these things for our children, but we do not. First of all, with some of these toddler formulas, some of them are overly sweetened. So again, you're sort of really getting your child used to these more sweet flavors, which we don't want to do. And they're not necessary. If your child is drinking milk and water, that they're going to get everything they need. The other thing with some of these formulas, if the child is drinking too much of these, they can get full, and then they're not going to want to they're not going to either want to, or they're not be hungry for the solid foods that we need them to eat. Sugar sweetened beverages should certainly be avoided. Things like soda, juice, drinks, and sports drinks tend to have a lot of added sugars in them, which again just adds increased calories, empty calories, no nutritional value, and can lead to weight gain. I have to say that when I have a child, especially an older child in my office who's struggling with gaining too much weight, one of the first places I look is at what they're drinking, because that can usually, I look at that as like a low-lying fruit. It's usually some place where we can make some changes that can really cut out quite a bit of calories fairly, I say easily, but I know it's not easy to change our eating habits, but this is a really good place to look when we need to make those changes. Flavored milk should be avoided. It's just adding added sugars, added calories with no added nutritional value. And caffeinated drinks should also be avoided. We don't have like a certain age where we say it's okay to give caffeine. We definitely don't want children under the age of 2 to be having it, but really we don't need to be introducing this to our children. It can cause problems with sleep disturbance, nervousness, irritability, and even headaches for some of us. I wanted to show you this table. I think this is a great illustration of how much sugar can be in some of these drinks. And we're going to talk about food labels in a little bit, and food labels tend to put things into grams, which is fine, but I think sometimes it's hard to conceptualize, well, how much really is that? And this table puts it into teaspoons for us. So I just wanted to point out, if you look at a regular soda, and this is a 12-ounce serving, so I think that's a can, right? It has 9 teaspoons of sugar in it. So if you think about measuring out 9 teaspoons of sugar, that is a lot. A fruit drink. So sometimes we can get fooled when something says fruit on it. That's why it's important to make sure it's 100% fruit juice if you are giving juice to your child. But these fruit drinks, they're not healthy. They can have up to 14 teaspoons of sugar and 238 calories. And I'll show you something at the end, but a toddler needs about 1,000 calories a day. So this drink would give them a quarter of their calories with really no nutritional value. So I just think it's helpful to look at it in those terms. Another thing I wanted to talk about briefly is not only what we feed our children, but how we feed them, in this concept of responsive feeding, which is basically just learning your child's hunger cues and fullness cues and responding to them. So here's some good examples in the little ones. So up to age 5 months, your child may be hungry if she's putting her hand to her mouth, turning her head toward the breast or the bottle, smacking their lips, or clenching their fists. Versus if the baby's closing their mouth, turning away, or really relaxed with their hands, that's a sign that they're full. With our older infants and toddlers, they're hungry when they're pointing to food, opening their mouth, getting excited when they see their food. And then they may be full when they start pushing things away, turning away, when we offer them food. Now, every single child is different. Parents know their child better than anybody, but learning your own child's hunger cues and fullness cues and responding to them can be really helpful. This can help teach children to self-regulate their intake, which again goes back to that, what I've been saying several times, is just establishing those healthy eating habits from the very beginning. Okay, and this is just an example of how we're doing. So this table is in reference to young children ages 2 to 4, and it's showing us how most of us do in terms of getting our children what they really need. So I'm just going to break this down for you. Each kind of column is a different food group. So here we have vegetables, and the purple dot is the average intake. This graph happens to break it down males versus females. So the purple dot is what an average child gets, and the green bar is the range of what's recommended. So you can see for vegetables, we tend to undershoot. For fruits, we do better. So it looks like most children are where they need to be for fruits. For grains, so that's our breads, our cereals, our crackers, we're better. For males, for example, we kind of overshoot. And I think that's understandable. I think kids do eat a lot of bread, crackers, tortillas, things like that. Dairy, we kind of undershoot. We perhaps don't get quite enough dairy in this age group. And then protein, we do better. We kind of hit the mark for that. So I think just keep being mindful of this. And again, it goes back to trying to give our kids a balanced diet, a diet that's varied, and a diet that really tries to hit the different food groups every day or most days. And we'll talk about that in a second. I did want to mention portion size just a little bit, and to keep in mind, so portions for little ones are smaller than they are for us and for our older children. And so this reference really tells us not only how many servings we should be getting for each of the food groups every day, but how big is a serving size. So I just give you a few examples. So for fruits, we want to shoot for 2 to 3 servings a day. So for a little one, ages 1 to 3, that's just a half a piece of fresh fruit, or a quarter cup of a canned fruit. Versus for our older kids, we're talking about a whole piece of fresh fruit. So that's just an example. And I say that not that you have to memorize what a serving is, but just sort of keep in mind what you're serving the little ones is obviously going to be less than what you're serving your older children and yourselves. And I think this is important when we're sort of sitting down for dinner as a family, and offering a little less to the child and having them want more and ask for more is probably better than just piling too much food on their plate. I think children tend to get a little overwhelmed with that. So now let's talk about a few specific instances, such as our picky eater, which is very common and very frustrating, but it's something I think we all deal with at some point or another. I think it's important to keep the big picture in mind. So not to stress too much if your child has a picky day, or for a few days you don't get a vegetable in them because they're being picky. But if overall, looking at the big picture, they're getting that balanced diet, that's what's important. The other thing that's important is if your child is growing, if your child is energetic, if when you take your child to the pediatrician and they look at that growth curve and your child is doing well, they're probably getting what they need. So again, looking at that big picture is really important, because I think this can be really stressful for us. And then I think that translates down to the kids as well. In terms of some strategies, trying to offer new foods. I think I mentioned this earlier, when your child is hungry can be helpful. Giving choices is always good for little kids. They like control. They like being the decision makers. They like being, deciding what they do. So giving them choices, but making both the choices healthy is a good strategy. If you know your child's likes, which we all parents do, then include one food in the meal that you know that they like and that they probably will eat, but then keep trying to introduce new foods. Have your child work up an appetite, which usually isn't too much of a problem for our little ones. And then sticking to a schedule for both meals and snacks can be helpful. I think, and this goes for so many things with our little ones, but if our children have a schedule, if they know what to expect, if they know what's coming, things just tend to go better. Some things to avoid. So food is nutrition. Food should not be used for a reward, bribe, or punishment. I think that sets up some habits that are hard to break. Much easier said than done, but don't give in to whining or tantrums. And don't make such a big deal about it, which is hard. But if you sit down, it's a good idea to eat as a family as much as possible, at least once a day. Don't make the food such a focus. Family meal time should be a fun time. It should be an enjoyable time. So put the food there. Don't focus on it so much. If they eat it, they eat it. If they don't, they don't. Don't feel like you need to make a second meal for your child. If he or she is hungry, he or she will eat. If they skip one meal, that's okay. But I think getting in the habit of making second meals just sets up some bad habits that are hard to break. Once the child gets a little bigger, some other strategies that can be helpful is let them participate. That can help children get excited about food. So if you bring your child to the grocery store, let them pick something out from the healthy section, from the produce section, that they can look forward to trying to eat later. Let them help prepare the food as much as possible, as much as they can be involved. That's another way to really get them excited and get them involved. And it's also important not to forget that our children watch everything we do. So we want to make sure we're modeling good eating habits for our children. If you show them you try new things, you eat a variety of things, they will pick up on that, and vice versa. If you refuse things or you have a very limited diet, they are also going to pick up on that as well. Once we have a picky eater, it's something we have to deal with, but there are some strategies that might be helpful in terms of preventing that picky eater. So our baby's taste buds are really immature up to age 9 months. So if we're starting to introduce those solid foods at 6 months, take advantage of that time. Introduce lots of different flavors and textures from the very beginning, fruits, vegetables, meats, everything, so that your child sort of expects to try new things, gets used to different flavors, gets used to just different their palate gets used to lots of variety. Another thing that we often see is changes in appetite in our children, and that's usually nothing to worry about. So if you think about our children go through growth spurts and they grow so fast during the first 12 months, and then growth, even though it's still relatively speaking to the rest of childhood, is fairly there is a lot of growth that's still happening. It's not as fast as what they do in that first year. So just as they go through growth spurts, they may go through appetite spurts, and their appetite may seem to be slowing down once they hit that toddler age. It's probably fine. Again, if your child is growing and active and energetic, most likely they're getting what they need. Appetites absolutely vary from day to day and even from meal to meal. If your child is going through one of these phases where their appetite seems to be a little less, then it's even more important to make sure that every bite counts. Make sure that if they're not putting a whole lot into their body, make sure that what they are putting into their body is as nutritious as possible. Again, focusing on choices can be helpful, but there is no need to really make sure your child, quote unquote, cleans their plate. This goes back to the hunger and the fullness cues that we talked about earlier. Let them feel their fullness. There's a sort of a phrase or a saying that the parent provides the food and the child decides what to eat. And I think there's something to that. We don't know really when our child is full, and so we really need to pay attention to what they're telling us. I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about food labels because this is important, and these were just updated not that long ago. So I'm just going to walk you through it, just the basics. So first thing we see up here is the serving size. So in the example here, a serving size is 2/3 of a cup. One thing to know, serving sizes are what someone typically eats, but it's not necessarily what's recommended. So don't take it as that. Like, don't even, doesn't necessarily mean that it's okay or fine to eat 2/3 of a cup of this food. It's just that's what people typically eat. Next, we have our calories. And remember, it's the calories per serving. So if you're going to eat 2 or 3 servings of this food, then you need to multiply those calories by 2 or 3 times to know how many calories you're ingesting. The next thing we see is our nutrients. So that's all the rest of it. Our fats, our sodium, our carbohydrates, which is our fiber. Now, food labels are required to have the added sugars that we've talked about so much already on the food label. Remember, these are things that we want to avoid. So having that spelled out for us is really helpful. We have our protein, and then we have vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium. The specific nutrients that are listed here has changed a little bit, and that's because these are the ones that we tend to not get enough of. So they're really spelling that out for us on the food label so that we know, and we can pay more attention to that so we can know that we're getting enough. The percentages here is the percent daily value. So for example, and it's also per serving. So for example, if I had 1 serving of this food, I would have 10% of my total fat for the day. If I had 1 serving of this food, I would get 20% of my calcium per day. So that just kind of gives you an idea of how you're doing for the day. I think one thing to know about these food labels is these percentages, it's based on a 2,000 calorie a day diet, which is sort of the general recommendation for adults. So it's not necessarily the recommendation for children. I think that's important to keep in mind, but I do think they're really useful, especially like if you want to compare 2 products. Okay, this product has 10% fat per serving. This product has 30% fat per serving. I think they're useful for not only knowing a little bit about the product itself, but also for comparing products. They can help us make sure we're staying away from those things that are not good for us and that we don't want to get too much of, and then gravitate towards those that have the things that we really do need. And when we talk about the percentages, sort of a rough estimate is something that's 20% or above is considered high in that nutrient or component, and something 5% or less is considered low in that component. So for example, we know that there are nutrients that we want to get less of. We don't want a whole lot of saturated fat or sodium, or as we've already talked about, added sugars in our diet. So looking here at this example, a serving of this food has 20% of our added sugar. So that's pretty high. So again, it's just a gauge to sort of help you stay in sort of the healthy categories. And then nutrients we want to get more of are these ones down here: the fiber, the vitamin D, the calcium, the iron, and potassium. And so this particular product has 20% calcium, 45% iron. So that's good. It's high in those things that we want to make sure we get enough of. And the other thing that food labels are required to do now, which I think is really helpful, if you are eating something, a package of something, and it's very likely that you're going to eat the whole package in one sitting. For example, in this example, it's a bag of pretzels. Then the food labels are required now to tell you how much not only is in a serving, but is in a whole bag. So, for example, this serving size is 3 pretzels, and there's 3 servings per container. So there's 9 pretzels per container. So the average person is probably going to eat the whole bag in one sitting. So this first column is per serving. The second column is per container. So it's doing the math for us. So we don't have to do the math. And I think that can be really helpful. So for example, if you look at the sodium and you were looking at serving sizes, 17%. I mean, it's not great, but it's under that 20%. But when you look at it as if you eat the whole bag, you're getting over half of the total recommended daily sodium that you should be getting. That's really high. So I think that that's really useful. And I'm glad that they're doing that in our food labels now. And as I mentioned, these food labels are based on an assumption of a 2,000 calorie a day diet, which is for adults. I just wanted to sort of give you an idea of what our younger children need in terms of calorie intake. I do not think that we need to be counting calories in our little kids. I think that's getting overly complicated, but just sort of to put things into perspective, 12-month-olds need about 800 calories. Up to around 21 to 23 months, we're talking 1,000 calories per day. And then this just breaks it down. Once we get past that 2-year age mark, it varies based on sex. So males tend to need more calories than females. It varies by age. We tend to need more calories as we get older, up to a certain age. And then of course, as we all know, it depends on how active we are. So if you have a less active child, they will need fewer calories than a child who's very active. But again, we've been really focusing on our sort of toddlers, our 2 and 3-year-olds. They need somewhere between 1,000 and 1,400 calories a day. So much less than the 2,000 that's referenced on those food labels. So that covers everything I wanted to go through for today. These are 3 helpful resources that I think you could find useful. These dietary guidelines just came out from the USDA. I got a lot of my tables and whatnot from there. Healthychildren.org. This is a wealth of information. Many of you are probably familiar with it already, but this is a website for the American Academy of Pediatrics. Any questions you have about what's going on with your child, I would start there. Really, really good information. And then myplate.gov. Also another useful website specifically for nutritional information. So now I would like to take any questions if there are any. I think I have to stop sharing my screen to see. Okay. Are there any questions? I don't see anything in the chat box, but does anybody want to you can just ask your question out loud right now if you have one. Everyone's quiet.
Oh, go ahead, Crystal.
Yes, I heard her mention something about to stay away from. I can't remember, but it's a certain type of drink.
So I talked about water and milk being really good for children. Right. 100% fruit juice is fine over the age of 1, but we really want to limit it. But then things to avoid are drinks that are packaged as toddler formulas, sodas, sports drinks, fruit drinks that they say fruit, but they're not really fruit juice. They just have, those drinks tend to have a lot of added sugar. And you're really mostly getting sugar without the nutrition. And then of course, caffeine, our children don't need drinks with caffeine.
And you mentioned something about them having their sippy cup with them daily. You said that's not it. That doesn't need to be an option. Just
Well,
only.
the thing that I think you have to be careful of there is if your child is sort of walking around with their sippy cup, if they're sort of like continuously drinking from their cup, it could do two things. It could interfere with their appetite. So it's sort of keeping them full and not letting them get to the hunger that they really should have at mealtime. And the other thing is if they're sort of continuously introducing sugars onto their teeth, it can affect the health of their teeth.
Got you. Also, my baby, she's gonna be 18 months. And so today she hasn't had her little friend with her all day. I won't say it because I know she'll hear me. But I was just trying to figure out some good ways that I could just, kind of wean her from it. Because I know it's starting to arch her teeth, and I can tell that it's affecting her.
The cup or the bottle? Is she on the bottom?
Pacifier.
Oh, the pacifier?
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Yeah, that you could do the sort of just what have you tried?
Oh, today's first day.
Oh.
she didn't have it at school. I told her teacher to let me know how she did. And she said, well, I guess she did amazing because she hadn't cried for it.
Yeah,
so today was the first day I tried it. Just try.
Don't give it to her. Just be done with it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Good job.
Okay. Oh yeah, I said I wanted to. Before she turns 2, I gotta nip that in the butt.
Good for you.
Yes, ma'am. But I think that was it.
Okay, thank you for your questions.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that could be a whole other struggle of the pacifier.
Oh, yes, it is. While we wait for another question, I just wanted to remind everyone, I know some of you have messaged Jamie your name and center. If you have not already done so, you can either place it in the chat or in the chat box, you can private message her. And that's Jamie. She's also one of the co-hosts on here. Because we do have some door prizes. So we are entering all of the parents' names that are in attendance into the drawing to be selected for a door prize. So be sure to do that before you leave.
That's great. Any other questions?
I had one question. The labels that you were showing, the dual labels that they have.
Yeah.
Well, I love that. That makes things so easy because
I do too.
Yeah. Is that something that will eventually be required for all types of food, or is that just a few things that's doing the dual labels?
So my understanding is it's for foods that that we as just general, the average person is likely to eat in one sitting.
Okay.
I don't know like really how that's determined. But yeah, that's my understanding. But I agree with you. I think it's super helpful. The less math we have to do in our heads, the better.
Yeah, I realized after seeing all that information there that I really need to pay closer attention to those labels.
Yes, I agree with you. Just sort of reviewing for this talk, I mean, it really is important. I've just found myself really paying more attention to those added sugars, and they're in everything. Like, I think things that we think are healthy, if you really start looking, they're not as healthy as you think they are. So it's really made me like just question like some of the things I've been eating and actually feeding my own children. I'm definitely going to start paying more attention to that.
Oh, definitely. After seeing that, yes, that was great.
Yeah. I think I don't know anything about like the business side of things and marketing, but I do think that there's so much of that goes into like foods and how they are presented to us. from the very beginning, even with all these formulas. I'm just like, oh my goodness, like lots of them are very similar, but they have all these fancy names that I don't even know what they mean. And it's just a lot of it is just a lot of spin that probably doesn't bring a whole lot of benefit. And in some instances, I think even gives us a false sense that we're doing something good when we may not be.
Yeah, well, I noticed that one of the things that I really kind of caught on that was actually looking at that serving size and having to actually figure out, well, I just see the big numbers there of 130 calories, and I'm thinking, oh, well, that's not bad. But then I got to look at that serving size and realize, oh, let me add in my other 130 calories, and pretty soon I'm adding in tons of calories.
Exactly. And, you know, they revamped these food labels not that long ago, and at least the serving sizes are now more realistic. Like I mentioned, it's supposed to be sort of what the average person would eat versus like being smaller, right? Because if the serving size is smaller and it's less than like what you're probably going to eat, again, it's giving you a false sense of how much you're really taking in, I think. So the changes to the food labels were really meant to be consumer friendly, and I think that they are. It's just a matter of really using them to the best of our advantage. Any other questions? Okay, I guess that's it.
This is Cassandra. Imagine. I just thought it was great information to have because, like the young lady just said before, you don't pay attention to all of a sudden you're adding more calories. It sounds good, but then after you constantly keep adding more and more, so this was good information to have. Is there any way we can get copies of that?
I'm happy to share my slides. I'm also so, and those websites would be important, good sources of information. But I'm happy to email my slides. I don't know if there's a way to distribute those to you.
We can make sure that they receive them as well as the actual recording of this as well.
Okay, I can email my slides to you.
Okay.
I'm glad you find it useful.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you. And before we go, if there are no further questions, I do just want to say thank you again to Dr. Hartford.
My pleasure.
She sits on our Health Services Advisory Committee, which is open to our community members in the health profession, along with our parents that just are interested in the health professions. And so we thank you so much. And I also see that we have policy council members online, like Cassandra Magid. So thank you so much for joining us as well, just so you can get some more information and participate in one of our events that we always have. So I just wanted to, like I say, just say thank you to you guys that are joining us that are part of our special committees and councils here at Arkansas Early Learning. Jamie or Melissa, do you guys have anything you wanted to add?
No, I just wanted to thank Dr. Hartford again for the great information. I know that as Health Service Advisory Committee members, I know that Dr. Hartford and Jennifer Wharton, who are with NYIT, have really been a big help this year with these Zoom parent trainings and just getting out a lot of good health information out to the families. So thank you guys.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. And I'm so sorry I left you out, Jennifer. I knew the name sounded familiar in the face too. And I was like, I think she is.
No worries. Thank you for having us.
Oh, thank you guys so much. Are there any other questions before we go ahead and end for the night? All righty then, you guys. Like we said, we are recording this session, so you guys will receive a link. So you guys can watch it again if you like, share it with your friends so they can have some really great information on here. I know I learned several things tonight, so.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yes. So we'll be in touch, and make sure, like I said, that you guys just respond in the chat box if you haven't already, to just let us know your name in the center that you're associated with so we can get you entered into the raffle. And I'll stay on till about 7:03 just to give you guys a couple of minutes for that. So
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.